Billionaire gave his credit card to a pregnant woman for 48 hours. What she did left him in tears. James Ashford had built his empire on one belief: people are selfish, especially the poor. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? At 38, James was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, CEO of Ashford Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate dealing in real estate, technology, and finance. His name carried power. His signature moved markets. His presence made rooms fall silent. Yet that freezing morning, standing behind the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of his corporate tower, James felt nothing but irritation. Below him, the city moved as it always did. Cars honking, people rushing, lives colliding. And there, right outside the gates of his company, sat someone that didn't belong in his perfect view. A pregnant woman. She was sitting on the cold pavement, her back against the iron railing, arms wrapped around her swollen belly as if shielding the life inside her from the freezing wind. She wore a thin coat, clearly not meant for winter. Her hair was messy, her face pale, lips trembling. A cardboard sign lay beside her. Pregnant, no family, please help. James clenched his jaw. Unbelievable, he muttered. Every day someone new appeared outside his building. Beggars, protesters, opportunists, people who wanted something for free. And James despised them all. They always choose the easy way, he said coldly, turning away from the window. If they worked half as hard as I did, they wouldn't be here. His assistant hesitated. Sir, it's freezing outside. James grabbed his coat. That's not my problem. Without another glance, he walked out of his office, rode the private elevator down, and exited the building. As he passed through the glass doors, the pregnant woman slowly lifted her head. Their eyes met for a brief second. There was no begging in her gaze, no drama, just exhaustion and quiet fear. For a moment, something stirred inside James. Then he crushed it. He walked right past her. Inside the building, the warmth returned. So did his certainty. In the executive lounge, Daniel Carter, James's oldest friend and business partner, was waiting. Daniel wasn't like James. He was rich, yes, but he still believed in people, something James found foolish. You look annoyed, Daniel said, sipping his coffee. There's a pregnant woman sitting outside the building. Security should have removed her. Daniel frowned. In this weather? James scoffed. Here we go. Daniel leaned back. James, not everyone out there is lazy or greedy. James laughed, sharp and humorless. That's exactly what they are. Give them money and they'll waste it. Alcohol, luxury, things they don't deserve. That's not true, Daniel said calmly, just like not all rich people are heartless. James's eyes darkened. I didn't get here by trusting people. The poor are poor because of their choices. Daniel shook his head. And what if life chose for them? Silence hung between them. James stood up abruptly. You know what? Let's test your theory. Daniel looked confused. Test what? James grabbed his wallet. You think poor people are good. I think they're greedy. Let's see who's right. Before Daniel could stop him, James stormed out of the lounge. The cold hit him immediately. The pregnant woman was still there. She looked even smaller now. James walked towards her, his expensive shoes stopping inches from her worn boots. She looked up, startled. I'm not asking for much, she said softly, her voice trembling. Just enough for food. James studied her.
Her hands were cracked from the cold, her belly indisputably heavy. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jessica," she replied. James pulled out a sleek black card. Her eyes widened. "This is my credit card," he said flatly. "Unlimited." Jessica froze. I don't understand." "You'll have it for 48 hours, James continued. "No limits, no questions. Buy whatever you want." Her hands shook. "Why?" James leaned closer, his voice low. "Because I want to see what someone with nothing does when given everything." Jessica swallowed. "This feels like a trick." "It's not," he said. "After 48 hours, I'll come back, same place." He placed the card in her trembling palm. "For 48 hours," he repeated. "Do whatever you want." Then he turned and walked away. Daniel watched from the entrance, stunned. "What did you just do?" James didn't stop. "I proved a point." That night, James didn't sleep. He lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling, his phone resting in his hand. The card was linked to his banking app. He could see every transaction. Midnight passed. Nothing. 1 a.m. Still nothing. "Planning something big," he muttered, "probably waiting for morning." At 7:42 a.m., his phone buzzed. Transaction, $46.30. Pharmacy. James frowned. Pharmacy? Another alert. Transaction, $112.80. Maternity store. Then another, $89.50. Grocery store. James sat up. "That's it?" he whispered. "No jewelry, no luxury brands, no hotels?" By noon, more transactions appeared. Baby clothes, prenatal vitamins, fresh food. James's chest tightened, but he pushed the feeling away. "She's just starting," he told himself. "Wait till tonight." But deep down, a crack had already formed in the belief he'd carried his whole life. And somewhere in the city, a pregnant woman named Jessica was making choices that would change everything. James believed the real test was still coming. He was wrong, because what Jessica would do next, with money she never thought she'd touch, would not only shatter James's beliefs, it would break his heart and rewrite both of their futures forever.
James Ashford refreshed the banking app again, and again, and again. The city outside his penthouse window was waking up, but James hadn't slept. The phone felt heavier with each refresh, like it knew something he didn't. At 11:06 a.m., the screen updated. Transaction, $1,200, residential payment portal. James frowned. "Rent," he muttered. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. At least she paid herself first. That thought barely formed when another alert appeared. $850, emergency assistance transfer. His jaw tightened. "That's still reasonable," he said aloud, convincing no one. Then the final notification arrived. $500, Women's Support Fund, anonymous donation. James stopped breathing. The room went silent, as if the city itself had paused to watch his reaction. "No," he whispered. "That can't be right." He stared at the screen, waiting for it to change, to correct itself, to make sense. But it didn't. Jessica, homeless, pregnant, cold, had taken money with no limits and given it away. James closed the app. For the first time in years, he felt something dangerously unfamiliar. Shame. That afternoon, James stood across the street from his own building, coat pulled tight, watching the sidewalk. Jessica was still there, but she wasn't begging. She was talking quietly to another woman, older,
exhausted, holding a toddler on her hip. James watched as Jessica handed her a folded envelope. The woman froze, then broke down, hugging Jessica like she'd been pulled back from the edge of something terrible. James didn't move. He waited. When the woman left, Jessica sat back down, rubbing her belly slowly. James crossed the street. She noticed him immediately and stood, panic flashing across her face. "I was going to bring it back," she said quickly, pulling the card out. "I just needed—" "Why the donation?" James interrupted. Jessica hesitated. Then she spoke, quietly but firmly. "When I first found out I was pregnant, I went to that shelter. I was terrified. They didn't have space, but they gave me food, blankets, and treated me like I mattered." James swallowed. "And your friend's rent?" She didn't ask. I just knew. She looked at me then, eye steady. "Just because I'm struggling doesn't mean I stop being human." That sentence didn't just hit me, it undid me. Because suddenly I remembered another winter, another sidewalk, a man outside a restaurant, cold, hungry. James was 21, rich already, his father beside him. "Don't," his father said when James slowed down. "You help one, you'll invite 10 more." James walked away, and he had never forgotten the look on that man's face. Until now. That night, James called Daniel. "You were right," James said. Daniel didn't sound relieved. He sounded cautious. "Careful." James frowned. "About what?" "You don't give people hope halfway, especially people with nothing to lose." James stiffened. "You think she's manipulating me?" "No, I think you're underestimating the consequences. The board won't like this. Media won't like this. And if anyone finds out—" "I don't care," James snapped. Daniel paused. "You will." The line went dead. The next morning, James didn't offer a miracle. He offered something smaller. Temporary housing, short-term assistance, a probationary job trial. Nothing permanent, nothing safe. Jessica accepted anyway. At work, she kept her head down, learned fast, worked harder than anyone else. She never mentioned the card again. But James noticed something else. People noticed her. Some whispered, some judged, and one person watched very closely. One evening, James invited Jessica to dinner. "Just dinner," he said. "No pressure." She hesitated. "People already talk." He nodded. "Then they'll talk anyway." At the restaurant, James finally said it. "I judged you." Jessica smiled faintly. "Most people do." "I don't anymore," he said, "and that scares me." She looked at him carefully. "I come with a child and a past." James met her gaze. "I know." But outside the restaurant, a man across the street raised his phone and took a photo. James thought money was the test. It wasn't. The real test would begin when the photo hit the boardroom and Jessica's past, one she never told him about, was dragged into the light.
The photo surfaced at 8:17 a.m. James saw it before anyone else did. It appeared in an internal media alert, low resolution, poorly framed, but clear enough to tell a dangerous story. James Ashford, CEO of Ashford Enterprises, sitting across a candlelit table with a visibly pregnant woman. Jessica. The caption was already spreading. Billionaire CEO romantically involved with homeless employee. James felt his stomach drop. He didn't finish his coffee. By 9 a.m., the boardroom was full. 12 people, 12 suits, 12 faces trained to smell weakness. James took his seat at the head of the table, expression calm, spine straight. He'd walked into hostile takeovers with less tension than this. One of the board members slid a tablet across the table. "You want to explain this?" she asked. James didn't look down. "It's a private dinner." Another man scoffed. "With a probationary employee you personally brought in off the street?" James finally met their eyes. "Yes." The room buzzed. "You violated company ethics," someone said. "You exposed us to reputational risk," another added. "And if the press digs further, they'll find her background." James' jaw tightened. "What background?" The board member tapped the tablet. "She was arrested 3 years ago." The words hit him like ice water. "For what?" asked James slowly. "Fraud," said the man. "Forgery. False identity usage." James felt the room tilt. "That's impossible," he said. "She took a plea deal," the woman added. "No jail time. Case sealed, but not invisible." Silence. James stood up. "Meeting adjourned." "You don't have that authority right now," someone snapped. James placed both hands on the table. "Watch me." He left without another word. In the elevator, his reflection stared back at him, controlled, composed, but his chest burned. Fraud? Forgery? He drove straight to Jessica's apartment. Jessica opened the door, already crying. "I didn't tell you," she said before he could speak. James stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Tell me now," he said quietly. She wiped her face with trembling hands. "My ex," she began. "He used my name, my documents. He was drowning in debt. When I found out, it was already too late." James listened, unmoving. "I covered for him," she whispered, "because I was scared, because I loved him, and because I didn't know how to say no back then." Her voice broke. "I paid for it. I lost everything, my job, my family, my home." She looked up at him, eyes full of fear. "If you fire me, I'll understand." James said nothing. That scared her more. Back at Ashford Enterprises, the board reconvened, without him. By afternoon, the decision was unanimous. Either James publicly distances himself from Jessica, or the board removes him as CEO. Daniel found him in his office, packing nothing, staring at nothing. "They're serious," Daniel said. James nodded. "I know." "You can't save everyone," Daniel added quietly, "and you can't burn the company for one person." James finally spoke. "My mother burned herself for strangers, and my father taught me never to feel it." Daniel sighed. "This isn't about feelings. This is about power." James stood. "Exactly." That evening, James held a press conference. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. "Is the relationship inappropriate? Did you hire her out of pity? Are the allegations true?" James stepped forward. "Yes," he said. The room froze. "Yes, I hired her. Yes, I took her to dinner. And yes, she has a past." Gasps rippled. James continued, voice steady. "She also has integrity, compassion, and more character than most people I've met in boardrooms." A reporter shouted, "Are you stepping down?" James didn't hesitate. "If the cost of leading this company is abandoning someone who earned my respect, then I don't deserve the title." The room erupted. Jessica watched the live stream from her couch, hands shaking, tears falling freely. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted this. Her phone buzzed. A message from James. "I choose you, whatever comes next." She pressed her hand to her belly and sobbed. By morning, the board made it official. James Ashford was suspended, pending removal. Stock prices dipped. Headlines exploded. But something else happened too. Emails poured in. Employees, former clients, people James had never met. Stories of kindness, of second chances, of redemption. The board hadn't expected that. Neither had James. James lost his title, his power, his protection. But what he gained would be tested immediately, because Jessica's pregnancy took a sudden turn, and the decision James made next would cost him more than his empire ever did. The call came at 2:43 a.m. James was awake. He had been awake every night since the press conference, lying on the couch of an empty apartment he hadn't bothered to decorate. His phone lit up, vibrating against the glass table. Unknown number. He answered immediately. "James?" a shaky voice said. It's me. Jessica." His chest tightened. "What's wrong?" "I'm bleeding. A lot." The word bleeding erased everything else. "I'm coming," James said, already grabbing his keys. "Don't hang up." The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. James paced the hallway outside the emergency room while nurses rushed past him, their shoes squeaking against the floor. Jessica had been taken in immediately. He hadn't even been allowed to touch her hand. A doctor finally approached. "Are you family?" she asked. James hesitated. "No," he said, "but I'm here." The doctor studied his face, then nodded. "She's experiencing complications. Severe stress can trigger this." James swallowed hard. Stress. Boardrooms, cameras, headlines. Him. "She keeps asking for you," the doctor added. "You can see her now." Jessica looked small in the hospital bed. Smaller than she had on the sidewalk, smaller than she had ever looked. Her face was pale, eyes glassy with pain and fear. Tubes and wires surrounded her like restraints. James moved closer, slowly, as if afraid she might disappear. "I'm here," he said softly. Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want this to happen." James shook his head. "This isn't your fault." She let out a broken laugh. "Everything feels like my fault." He took her hand carefully. "I chose this. All of it. You didn't ask me to." She squeezed his fingers weakly. "You lost everything." James looked at her belly, then back at her. "No," he said quietly. "I found something." Hours passed. Doctors came and went. Monitors beeped steadily, then irregularly. At one point, the room went silent, too silent. A nurse rushed in, then another. James stood frozen in the corner. His voices grew sharp and urgent. "We're losing the baby's heartbeat." Jessica screamed. James's heart shattered at the sound. The doctor turned to James suddenly. "We may need to make a decision." James felt dizzy. What kind of decision? "Emergency surgery. There's a risk." "To the baby?" James asked. "To both," the doctor replied gently. Jessica's grip tightened around his hand. "I can't lose this baby. He's all I have." James bent closer, tears blurring his vision. "You're not alone. You never will be again." The doctor spoke quietly. "We need consent." Jessica looked at James, eyes full of terror and trust. "You decide. I trust you." The weight of that sentence nearly crushed him. In that moment, James Ashford had no power, no title, no board, no money that could fix this. Just a choice. Save the baby at higher risk to Jessica, or prioritize Jessica and risk the baby. James closed his eyes. He thought of the sidewalk, the credit card, the donation. He thought of his mother, and for the first time he prayed. "I choose her," James said, voice breaking. "Do whatever it takes to save her." Jessica sobbed, clutching his hand. The doctor nodded and moved quickly. They wheeled her out. James was left alone. The waiting room was empty. Time stretched into something unbearable. James sat with his head in his hands, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. A nurse approached quietly. "She's stable." James looked up, breath catching. "And the baby?" The nurse hesitated. "We did everything we could." The world tilted. James stood when the doctor returned. "She survived," the doctor said softly. "But the baby—" She didn't finish the sentence. James nodded slowly, absorbing pain that felt physical. "Can I see her?" Jessica woke hours later. Her eyes searched the room immediately. James was there. She knew. Before he said a word, she knew. Her sob broke something inside him. "I'm so sorry," James whispered. "I chose you." She cried into his chest, grief pouring out of her in waves. After a long time, she whispered, "Thank you." James pulled back, stunned. "For what?" "For loving me enough to choose my life." Tears streamed down his face. That night, James sat alone again, but this time he wasn't empty. He was grieving, and grieving meant he cared. His phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. "The board wants to talk. They didn't expect public support. They're reconsidering." James stared at the screen. Power was knocking again, but he didn't know if he wanted to answer. James lost the child he never had the chance to love. Jessica lost the future she dreamed of. And just when they thought the pain couldn't deepen, the truth about Jessica's past, the part she never told anyone, was about to surface.
Grief doesn't leave, it settles. Jessica learned that in the days after the hospital. She moved through the apartment quietly, like sound itself might break something fragile inside her. The nursery corner, half imagined, never built, became a place she avoided. James noticed. He noticed everything now. He didn't try to fix her. He just stayed. Sometimes that was harder. 3 days after she was discharged, the knock came. Jessica froze. James stood up immediately. "I'll get it." At the door stood a man in a dark coat, holding a leather folder. His eyes flicked past James, already judging the space. "Jessica Miller?" the man asked. James stiffened. "Miller." Jessica stepped forward slowly. "That's my old name." The man nodded. "I'm with the district attorney's office." The air changed. "We're reopening a case," he continued. "New evidence has surfaced." James turned sharply toward Jessica. She looked terrified, but not surprised. After the man left, silence swallowed the room. James finally spoke. "You said it was sealed." "I thought it was, I swear." "Why didn't you tell me your real last name?" he asked. Not accusing, but hurting. She sat down heavily. "Because that name cost me everything." She told him the truth that night. All of it. Her ex wasn't just bad with money, he was dangerous. He used her identity to run a small fraud ring, fake checks, false accounts, quick cash. When the police came, he disappeared. Jessica was left behind, pregnant, broke.
guilty. They told me if I testified, she said, voice shaking, they'd protect me. James' jaw tightened. And did they? She laughed bitterly. He vanished. I became the criminal. Her hands trembled. When I took the plea, they promised the case would stay buried. James exhaled slowly. And now? She met his eyes. Now someone wants him bad enough to dig me back up. The next morning, headlines exploded. CEO linked to fraud case resurfaces. Ashford's judgment questioned again. The board called an emergency meeting. Daniel met James in the hallway beforehand. "This is bad," Daniel said quietly. "They're saying she lied to you." James's voice was steady. "She didn't. They don't care." Inside the boardroom, the tone was colder than ever. "You brought a criminal into this company," one member said. "She paid for her mistakes," James replied. Another leaned forward. "And what happens when the DA indicts her again?" James didn't hesitate. "Then I stand with her." The room went silent. "You'll lose everything," the chairwoman warned. James nodded. "Then I lose it." That night, Jessica packed a bag. James found her at the door. "I won't let you destroy myself for you," she said. "You won't let me choose?" he asked quietly. Tears streamed down her face. "I already lost one life because of my past. I won't lose yours too." James stepped closer. "You're not a burden." She shook her head. "You don't know what he's capable of." James froze. "He?" Her breath caught. "He's back," she whispered. James felt the ground shift. "You're sure?" Jessica nodded. "That's why the case reopened. He turned himself in." To reduce his sentence, James realized. "And he named me again." Silence crushed them. James took her hands. "Then we fight," he said. She looked at him broken. "People like him always win." James leaned his forehead against hers. "Not this time." 2 days later, James received a private message, a burner number. "Walk away from her, or she won't survive this twice." James stared at the screen. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "You already chose her once. Let's see how many times you're willing to lose." James closed his eyes. This wasn't about reputation anymore. This was war. James had faced hostile takeovers, public humiliation, the loss of power. None of it prepared him for this. Because the next move wouldn't be made in a boardroom, but in the shadows, where money, fear, and secrets decide who lives free.
James didn't reply to the message. He read it once, then again, then locked his phone and sat in the dark. For the first time since this all began, fear crept in. Not panic, not anger, but something colder. Calculation. Someone wanted him to walk away, and that meant walking away was exactly what they feared. By morning, Jessica was gone. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter. Her bag was missing. The door wasn't forced. James stood still, listening to the silent scream. "She wouldn't leave," he whispered. He checked security footage. At 3:12 a.m., a black sedan pulled up. Jessica stepped inside calmly. Too calmly. No struggle, no hesitation. Someone she knew. James's hands curled into fists. Daniel answered on the first ring. "She's gone," James said. A pause.
Gone how? Taken, or convinced. Daniel swore under his breath. James, this is beyond you now. No, James replied. It's because of me. 3 hours later, the call came. Unknown number. James answered without speaking. You should have listened, a man's voice said. Smooth, familiar. James's blood ran cold. Where is she? He demanded. The man laughed softly. Still choosing other people over herself? Some habits never die. You used her, James said. Yes, and now I'm using you. The line went dead. A message followed. Warehouse, East Harbor. Come alone. James didn't tell Daniel. He didn't call the police. He went. The warehouse smelled of rust and oil. Shadows swallowed sound. A single bulb flickered overhead. Jessica sat on a chair, wrists free, but her eyes were hollow. Across from her stood a man James recognized immediately. Her ex. You ruined my life, the man said calmly. James stepped forward. You did that yourself. The man smiled. No, she did, and you finished the job. He gestured toward Jessica. She testifies, I go away forever. James's jaw tightened. And if she doesn't? The man shrugged. She disappears, quietly. James felt something inside him snap. You won't touch her again. The man laughed. You think money scares me? You think power scares me? I already lost everything. James stepped closer. So did I, he said. That's why you should be afraid. James made an offer. He would leverage everything, lawyers, influence, exposure, to ensure the man got a deal. In exchange, Jessica walks free. The man considered it, then smiled. I want more. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, forged transfers, fake accounts, all in James's name. You take the fall, or she does. Jessica gasped. James, don't! James didn't hesitate. I'll do it, he said. Her head snapped up. No! James looked at her, eyes steady. I choose you. The police sirens came an hour later. James walked out in cuffs. Jessica screamed his name as they dragged him away. James didn't look back. James Ashford gave up his freedom to save the woman who once had nothing. But prison has rules, and one of them is this: billionaires don't survive without enemies.
James Ashford stopped being James Ashford the moment the cell door closed. Inside D Block, names didn't matter. Net worth didn't matter. History didn't matter. Only survival did. The guard shoved him forward. Bottom bunk, don't cause problems. The cell smelled of sweat and metal. 2 men already occupied it. One thin and twitchy, the other massive, his arms inked with symbols James didn't recognize. The big one looked up. Well, he said slowly, smiling without warmth, looks like money finally ran out. James said nothing. That was mistake number 1. By the end of the first week, James learned the rules. Don't stare, don't ask questions, and never pretend you belong. But pretending had always been his problem. In the yard, whispers followed him. That's the billionaire. He'll fold. Easy target. On day 9, someone tested that theory. It happened fast, too fast. A shove, a fist, another. James hit the ground hard, the taste of blood sharp in his mouth. He didn't fight back, not because he couldn't, but because he knew better. Fighting drew attention, and attention was fatal. That night, the big man from the cell leaned down from the top bunk.
"You don't belong here," he said, "which means you need protection." James wiped blood from his lip. "At what cost?" The man smiled. "Everything." Outside, Jessica couldn't sleep. James's apartment felt wrong without him. Too quiet, too safe. She watched the news obsessively. Disgraced CEO held without bail. Forgery case expands. Comment sections were brutal. She ruined him. Gold digger. Criminals attract criminals. Jessica shut the laptop and cried until her chest ached. Then she stopped. She wiped her face, stood up, and did something she hadn't done in years. She decided not to run. Jessica went to Daniel first. She said, "I need help." Daniel studied her carefully. "James gave up everything for you." "I know," she replied. "Now it's my turn." Daniel exhaled. "Your ex isn't as untouchable as he thinks." They began quietly. Bank records, shell companies, witnesses too scared to speak, until they weren't. Jessica remembered details James never could. Dates, voices, patterns. Pain had sharpened her memory. Back inside, James paid the price for refusing protection. Someone slipped something into his food. He spent the night vomiting, shaking on the concrete floor. In the morning, the big man crouched beside him. "Last chance," he said. "You want to live, you work for me." James met his eyes. "I don't work for criminals." He laughed. "I already did. You just wore a better suit." James closed his eyes. That was the moment he understood. This place didn't break you with violence. It broke you with truth. Weeks passed. James grew quieter, leaner, harder. He learned when to speak and when silence was currency. He shared nothing of his past. No one knew why he was really there, except one man, an older inmate named Marcus, who watched James carefully. "You're not like the others," Marcus said one night. "You're here because you chose someone." James looked up sharply. "How do you know?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Because only men who love something more than themselves end up like you." Outside, Jessica got her first break. A former associate of her ex agreed to testify, off the record. "He kept copies," the man said nervously. "Insurance against everyone." "Where?" Jessica asked. The man hesitated. "Storage unit, under a fake name." Jessica's hands trembled. They were close, too close. Inside the prison, the big man made his move. "You belong to me now," he told James one evening. "You'll move money when you get out." James laughed quietly. "I'm not getting out." The man's smile vanished. "That's not your decision." That night, James was cornered in the shower. Fists, elbows, pain exploding behind his eyes. Marcus dragged him out before it got worse. "You don't survive here alone," Marcus said. "You need allies." James coughed, blood streaking the floor. "I already chose my side." Jessica opened the storage unit at dawn. Inside were hard drives, ledgers, proof, everything. She sank to her knees, shaking. This could end it, but it could also kill James if she moved too fast. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Stop digging." Another message followed. "He'll not survive another week." Jessica screamed. Then she stood, and for the first time since losing her child, since losing her life, since losing James, she chose rage. James was running out of time. Jessica was running out of fear, and the next move would decide everything, because saving James meant exposing a truth powerful people would kill to keep buried.
Jessica didn't sleep. She sat on the floor of Daniel's apartment. The hard drives lined up in front of her like unexploded bombs. Every file name felt heavy. Every timestamp was proof someone never expected to matter. Daniel paced. "Once this goes public, there's no one due." Jessica nodded. "I know. And James?
he added quietly. Prison reacts fast to headlines. She closed her eyes. I can't save him by staying silent. That's what he taught me. At 9:02 a.m., the story broke. Not through tabloids, through evidence. Financial records leaked to 3 major outlets simultaneously. Shell companies, forged accounts, names far bigger than Jessica's ex buried in the data. Politicians, executives, donors, and one familiar name appeared, not as a criminal, but as a shield. James Ashford. The narrative shifted in hours. CEO took the fall to protect whistleblower. Forgery case exposes corporate network. Jessica watched the headlines with shaking hands. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. You stupid woman, you just signed his death warrant. The line went dead. Inside D Block, the guards felt it before the inmates did. Tension rose like heat. Whispers traveled fast. He flipped. He talked. That billionaire burned people. James was pulled from his cell before lunch. The big man waited in the corridor, smiling. You made noise. Noise gets people killed. James said nothing. They shoved him into solitary. Dark, cold, silent. Hours passed. Then pain. Someone came in the night. No cameras, no names. James curled inward, refusing to scream. He thought of Jessica. He held on. By evening, a senator resigned. By midnight, 2 executives were arrested. And by dawn, the warden's office received a call that changed everything. James Ashford was no longer an inmate. He was a liability. Jessica stood outside the courthouse the next day, surrounded by microphones. I didn't ask James to save me, she said clearly. He chose to, and I chose to tell the truth. A reporter shouted, Are you afraid? Jessica paused. Yes, she said, but fear is how this started. I won't end it that way. Across town, James lay on a prison infirmary bed, barely conscious. A guard leaned down and whispered, almost kindly, You just became very important. James laughed weakly. That's never been good news. Daniel arrived at the prison with papers in hand. Emergency motion, protective custody, federal transport request. The system moved, not because it was kind, but because it was exposed. James was moved before nightfall. Jessica watched the transport van disappear through the gates, her tears streaming down her face. He was alive. For now. That evening, Daniel met her quietly. You did it. Jessica shook her head. Not yet. Daniel hesitated. There's something else. He handed her a file. Inside was a medical report. Jessica's breath caught. She read it again and again. Her hands flew to her mouth. This says... Daniel nodded slowly. It's rare, but possible. Jessica sank into the chair, laughing and crying at the same time. Life, cruel, relentless life, had changed direction again. Jessica shattered a network powerful enough to destroy nations. James survived the retaliation, barely. But fate wasn't finished, because the report in Jessica's hands meant their story wasn't ending in loss. It was beginning again.
The hospital room was too quiet. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed. The medical report folded and unfolded so many times. It felt soft, fragile, like it might disappear if she looked away for too long. She pressed her hand to her stomach. Not flat anymore. Not empty. Her breath shook. I thought I lost everything, she whispered to no one. I was wrong. The doctor had explained it carefully, gently, as if words themselves could bruise. Rare, unlikely, but possible. The pregnancy hadn't ended. It had paused, wounded, fragile, but alive. Jessica cried then. Not loudly, not the way grief had torn out of her before. This was quieter. This was fear braided with hope. James woke to light. Real light. Not the flicker of a broken bulb or the gray haze of a prison morning,
but clean white light that hurt his eyes. He tried to move. Pain answered. A nurse leaned over him. "Easy, you're safe." James laughed weakly. "That's debatable." "You've been transferred," she said. "Federal custody. Protective unit." He swallowed. "Why?" She hesitated, then smiled slightly. "Because someone made a lot of powerful people uncomfortable." He knew immediately. Jessica. 2 days later, Daniel stood across from him, a thick folder in his hands. "You're getting out," Daniel said. James stared. "On bail?" "No," Daniel replied. "Charges dropped. Evidence invalidated. Your name cleared." James closed his eyes. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. "I didn't do this," he finally said. Daniel shook his head. "No, she did." Jessica stood outside the facility when James walked out. He looked thinner, scarred, changed in ways no suit could hide. For a second, they just stared at each other. Then she ran. James caught her carefully, like she might break, his arms tightening as if letting go would undo everything they'd survived. "You're here," he whispered. She nodded against his chest. "I'm here." They didn't talk about prison. They didn't talk about pain. Not yet. They just stood there, breathing the same air, alive. That night, they sat together on the couch, silence heavy, but no longer unbearable. James noticed the way Jessica's hands kept drifting to her stomach. He frowned slightly. "Are you okay?" She looked at him. Really looked at him. "I need to tell you something." His chest tightened. "Okay." She took his hand and placed it where her heart was racing. "Promise me you won't be angry." He managed a small smile. "After everything, that bar is very high." She laughed softly, then cried. "I'm still pregnant." The world stopped. James stared at her uncomprehending. "But they said they were wrong, or maybe not entirely right." She pressed his hand lower. "There's a heartbeat." James broke. He dropped to his knees in front of her, forehead resting against her stomach, shaking with sobs he didn't try to hide. "I chose you," he whispered. "I would choose you again." Jessica threaded her fingers through his hair. "I know." For the first time, hope didn't feel dangerous. The media tried again. Offers, interviews, redemption arcs. James refused them all. Instead, he stood beside Jessica in court as she testified, not as a defendant, but as a witness. Her ex was sentenced quietly. No drama, no victory speeches, just an ending. Months passed. Life didn't become perfect, but it became honest. James stepped away from his old empire and built something smaller, cleaner, a foundation for legal aid for women trapped in systems designed to erase them. Jessica worked beside him, not because he owed her, because she chose him. One evening, as they walked slowly through a park, James stopped. "I spent my life believing people only take. I was wrong." Jessica smiled gently. "Some people give, even when it costs them everything." James took a breath. "Marry me," he said. "Not because I saved you, not because you saved me, but because we survived each other's worst." Jessica laughed through tears. "Yes." They thought the fight was over. They thought truth had won. But the past doesn't release its grip so easily, because the final test wouldn't come from enemies, but from the one place James never learned to protect.
The contractions started just before dawn. Jessica awoke with a sharp intake of breath, one hand gripping the edge of the bed, the other instinctively moving to her stomach. For a moment, fear rushed in. Memories of hospital lights, alarms, loss. Then James was there. "I've got you," he said, already pulling on his jacket. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. Outside, the city was still half asleep, the same city where this story had begun, with cold pavement and judgment, and a man who believed people only took. The irony didn't escape James. The hospital room filled slowly. Monitors, nurses, instructions. James stood at Jessica's side, useless and essential all at once. Every time she cried out, it felt like the world narrowed to a single point. Her pain, his helplessness. "You're doing amazing," he whispered, again and again, like the words could carry her through. Hours passed. Then the doctor's tone shifted. "We have a problem." James's heart dropped. The baby's heartbeat faltered just for a second, but it was enough. Enough to bring fear roaring back. "We need to move quickly," the doctor said. Jessica squeezed James's hand. "Don't leave." "I won't. Not now. Not ever." Outside the room, Daniel answered a call that made his face go pale. "They're trying one last move, an injunction. If it goes through, they'll freeze your foundation, your accounts, everything. They want leverage." James closed his eyes. "Even now, even here." "What do they want?" he asked. Daniel swallowed. "A statement discrediting Jessica, publicly. If you do it, they back off." James didn't hesitate. "Then they can burn it all," he said. Daniel stared at him. "James, this is your future." James looked through the glass at Jessica, fighting through pain with a strength that humbled him. "No," he said softly. "This is." The cries came suddenly, sharp, new, alive. A sound that cut through fear like light through smoke. The baby's cry. James laughed and cried at the same time, collapsing into a chair as the doctor smiled. "It's a girl." Jessica sobbed with relief. When they placed the baby in her arms, the world went quiet in the best way possible. James approached slowly, like he might scare the moment away. "She's perfect," he whispered. Jessica looked up at him, exhausted and radiant. "She's here." James reached out, touching his daughter's tiny hand. In that instant, something inside him healed. Later, when the room was calm and the city fully awake, James stood by the window holding his child. He thought of another morning, another woman on cold pavement, another choice he almost didn't make. Jessica watched him quietly. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He smiled softly. That power never felt like this. She reached for him. "What do you want to name her?" James looked down at the tiny life in his arms. "Hope," he said, "because she survived what shouldn't have been survivable." Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. "Hope Ashford." The injunction failed. The threats faded. Not because the system became kind, but because exposure made cruelty expensive. James stepped away from the spotlight completely. No interviews, no speeches. He focused on building something that didn't require applause. Jessica healed, slowly, honestly. They married quietly, without cameras, without headlines. And one winter morning, years later, James stopped outside a building he no longer owned. A pregnant woman sat nearby, shivering. James knelt down. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Once James Ashford believed people were selfish, especially the poor. Now he knew better. Because the woman who had nothing gave him everything that mattered. And that changed the world, starting with his own.